Hey guys, Camus here with Rocket Powered Sounds. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about harmonics. Now, you may be familiar with this already, or at least have heard the term before, but hopefully, by the end of this video, you'll understand what harmonics are, their impact on sound, and how we can use them creatively in our productions. In music production and sound design, understanding harmonics is crucial. Harmonics shape the timbre and character of your sound, and knowing how to control this will allow you to create much more complex sounds and patches. First off, what are harmonics? Often referred to as overtones, harmonics are integer multiples of a fundamental frequency. If I play a saw wave, we can see on the spectrum analyzer there are all these spikes. The lowest spike here represents the fundamental. This is the perceived pitch of the sound. In this case, it's 220 Hz, which is A3 on the keyboard. All these other spikes represent the harmonics that make up the sound. If I morph this saw to a square wave, take note of the fundamental. As you can see, the fundamental frequency isn't changing. This is useful to note if you're ever struggling to figure out the key of a sample you have. You can simply load up an EQ or spectrum analyzer, in this case I'm using Span, which is a free piece of software, and you can visually see what the fundamental frequency is. As an example, I have this 808 sample here that doesn't have the note in the name. I can simply play it and use the spectrum analyzer to figure out what note it is. In this case, it's F sharp. Going back to our saw wave, we can see that while the fundamental doesn't change, all of these upper harmonics do as I morph between waves. If you've ever wondered why a saw wave sounds different to a square wave, or how a piano sounds different to a violin, this is why. When we hear a sound, we're not just hearing a single frequency or tone, we're hearing all of these overtones as well. And how these overtones are arranged will have an effect on the timbre and give each sound a unique character. The quantity, volume level, arrangement, and phase of the harmonics are all variables that result in different sounds. Like here, this triangle wave sounds smooth and pure due to the reduced number of harmonics, while this saw wave is rich in harmonics and sounds more full as a result. Comparing the square wave, it sounds harsher as only odd harmonics are being emphasized. One wave I haven't mentioned yet is the sine wave, which sounds like this. This is a pure tone, a single frequency. Each one of these spikes represents a single frequency, meaning what you're looking at on a spectrum analyzer is just a bunch of sine waves playing all at the same time, just at different frequencies. That's right, everything is made out of sine waves. Everything you've ever heard and any sound you could ever imagine is just a different combination of a bunch of sine waves. A good way to show you this is by using the harmonic section of Serum's wavetable editor. Each of these bars represents a sine wave. If I clear this out and draw each bar in, you can see that we're getting the same waveform, just at different pitches. What I mean when I say the harmonics are integer multiples of the fundamental is this. Bar 1 represents the fundamental frequency, also known as the first harmonic. In this example, I'm playing A3, which is 220 Hz. Bar 2 represents the second harmonic, and is 2 times the fundamental, 440 Hz. It's the same with bar 3. Bar 3 represents the third harmonic and is 3 times the fundamental, 660 Hz, and so on and so forth until we pass the threshold of human hearing. This section here is the visual representation of the waveform that is being created from all of these sine waves. You can see the shape change as I draw in new harmonics, but you can also see the level and arrangement of these harmonics change as I draw in shapes. I hope that paints a decent picture in your head as to what harmonics are and how they affect the sounds we hear. There's a whole world of stuff on this topic I could go over with Fourier transform, inharmonics, subharmonics, but now we understand the basic concept. It brings us on to how we can actually sound design using harmonics. There are many ways to do this, the most prominent being through additive synthesis, subtractive synthesis, FM synthesis, and creative use of distortion. Starting with additive synthesis, this is a technique where you start with a pure tone and build up the sound by layering harmonic partials to generate the timbre. This was what I was showing off in Serum. As I draw in different harmonics and arrangements, I'm able to get a wide range of sounds. This technique can result in harmonically complex timbres like this, or smooth glossy ones like this. Native Instruments Razor is a dedicated additive synth that lets you create all kinds of complex patches and is the go-to for this kind of sound. I'd also recommend Arturia Pigments and Minimal Audio's Current, as both feature additive section built into their synth engines. But if you don't have access to those, Serum, Faceplant, and Vital all have their own additive sections that allow you to draw in individual harmonics. Subtractive synthesis is the complete opposite of this, where additive synthesis has you start with a pure tone. For subtractive, you start with a harmonically rich waveform and use filters to sculpt and shape the sound. If I start with a saw wave and add a filter, you can hear the effect on the tone as I move the cutoff around. Filtering the upper harmonics makes the sound darker, and increasing the cutoff brings back that brightness. There's lots you can do with this simple idea. You could leave it as a static effect, if you like the tone, or you could envelope it, where the attack of each sound opens the filter like this. Or you can modulate it so it evolves and morphs over time with an LFO. And of course, you're not just limited to a saw wave, you can experiment with different waveforms and different filters. The sounds you're able to create using subtractive synthesis can range from warm synth pads to growling, morphing bass lines like this. Almost every synthesizer has filters in and can be used for subtractive synthesis. Serum is especially fun to experiment with as it has a wide range of unique and interesting filters. The next technique is FM synthesis. Frequency modulation is the process of modulating one wave with another carrier wave. FM, also known as frequency modulation, is the process of modulating one wave with another carrier wave and is used to create complex harmonic structures. It's always funny realizing that the lush pads, acoustic sounding bells, mallets, and e-pianos popular in the 80s that sound like this are made using the same technique as Skrillex growls and tear-out guns like this. But that just shows you how powerful FM synthesis is. FM is common on most modern synth plugins. Again, Serum, Faceplant, Vital all have the ability to create sounds using it. Operator and Citrus are the go-to stock ones for Ableton and FL. If you're looking for something different though, FM8 is a powerful, dedicated FM synth, extensively used by many popular artists. Or you could check out Dext, which is a free software recreation of the classic Yamaha DX7. Both of these make creating harmonically complex sounds simple and fun to experiment with. Finally, distortion and saturation is a really good way to shape harmonics. This effect introduces harmonics by adding non-linearities to the signal, making sounds thicker, warmer, or brighter. It can be used as a subtle effect for some light saturation, or used to annihilate and add aggression or crunch to a sound. If I start with a sine wave, we can hear that as I increase the drive, it adds some nice character. But slamming it will completely change the tone. I recommend experimenting with different distortion types and plugins. Serum has a number of unique types in its distortion engine. Fruity Wave Shaper and Fast Distortion in FL Studio, and Ableton's Saturator, Amp, and Raw are really good stock plugins to get you started experimenting with distortion. Some plugins I use are Thermal by Output and Isotope's Trash. The benefit of these is that they allow for multi-band processing. If you don't have either of these, I've heard good things about the plugins Prisma and Fire, both of which are free multi-band distortions. Distorting an entire signal will sound different to distorting a reduced frequency range. Here is an example on a vocal. Here's the dry signal.
Stay here with me all night.
Adding distortion to just this high band adds brightness without muddying up the signal.
Stay here with me all night. Stay here with me all night.
You can hear if I expand the band to include the entire signal, it sounds much less clean.
Stay here with me all night.
Try that again.
Stay here with me all night.
That's not to say that's always an undesirable effect. Here, I'm using an amp style distortion to turn the vocal into an electric guitar sounding instrument.
Stay here with me all night.
It's worth experimenting with different sounds and different types of distortion to find interesting ways of creating complex harmonics. All these techniques simply boil down to being different ways of shaping the harmonics of your sound. So the question is now, what kind of practical application does all of this have? How can we use it in our music? Well, the sky's the limit, and I encourage you to experiment with each technique to see what you can create. I have some ideas to recommend to get you started. Number 1, creating basses. You can use additive synthesis to create spectral morphing subs. Subtractive synthesis for morphing growly reeses. And FM synthesis for rich, warm bass lines. Number 2, as I previously shown, you can add brightness or warmth to sounds with distortion, or you can crush them and use them as a creative effect like I showed with the vocals. Number 3, adding punch and character to drums. Here's an example of some kicks with and without saturation. You can hear how adding a slight bit of distortion changes these kicks' tones in a cool way. Number 4, creating bells, plucks, and lead instruments. FM, additive, and subtractive synthesis are all ideal for creating glossy bells, smooth pads, and plucky instruments. Or number 5, being my personal favourite, creating drones and background ambience. I'd like to highlight drone sound design and talk about how we can use everything we have learned to make rich and full ambiences. Drones are sustained notes or tones that provide a continuous sonic background. They are rich in harmonics and serve as a base layer in ambient, cinematic, and experimental music. Here's a short loop that I've put together. In this example, I'm using drones to fill up the background and give harmonic context to the track. You can hear, when I mute these layers, how empty the track sounds in comparison. On their own, these drones sound like this. If you've ever been wondering why your tracks don't sound as full as the songs you listen to, then start adding drones. One artist who is synonymous with the use of drones is Fred again. If you're unfamiliar, he's a popular electronic artist who frequently uses drones to create an immersive and cohesive sonic environment. They often serve as a foundation, providing a rich harmonic backdrop that supports the melodic and rhythmic elements of his music. By incorporating evolving drones, he enhances the emotional depth and atmospheric quality of his tracks, making them more engaging and dynamic. We can use any of the techniques we've talked about as a base to create some drones, but there's a few things you should consider to help elevate them to the next level. The first being layering. If you want to create a harmonically rich sound, layering two different sounds together will give you a broader sound palette and a more full sound. In this preset, I'm layering 3 waveforms that sound like this. Oscillator A is warm and rich, while oscillator B is softer and brighter. Meanwhile, the sub-oscillator is providing a strong fundamental, and together it sounds more full. Another example is in this patch, where I'm layering the sound of a violin with this synth waveform. This creates a nice blend of synthesized and acoustic elements. Next, it's important to use modulation. Here's a saw wave with no modulation. Over time, this gets stale and uninteresting for the listener, as there's nothing new for our ear to latch onto. You can see that the harmonics don't move at all on the spectrum analyzer. Compare that to this, which has modulation on the filters and wavetable position. Each LFO is adding motion and depth to the sound and keeps the listener engaged as it drones on. You can apply this modulation to the pitch, volume, panning, dry wet of effects to get different results. A tip for this is to turn off BPM and run each LFO at a different speed with different shapes to create modulation that never overlaps or repeats. You could also use Serum's chaos modifier, which is here, or a random LFO. Another thing to note is that you shouldn't sleep on using effects to add even more depth and texture to your sounds. Delays and reverbs will give space and width to your drones and help them wash into the background. Shimmer reverbs and pitched grain delays will add a nice airiness and shine to them if that's the sound you're going for. Some plugins I'd recommend are Valhalla Supermassive, Delay, and Space by Spectral Plugins. Here's a basic sine wave with and without delay and reverb. And if I turn it on, instant drone. Hybrid reverb is good because it has a few different algorithms to play with. Here's some comparison. If you use FL, try Fruity Convolver's Blur Pink preset, which, as the name implies, totally blurs whatever you run through it into a wash of sound. You should also try adding phasers, flanges, chorus somewhere in the chain to create even more motion to your sound. Kilohertz has free versions of all these effects, or you could just use the ones built into Serum and Vital. Get experimental too. Use spectral gates, bit crushes, comb filters to see if it creates anything cool. To give you inspiration, here's a couple patches I've made. In this one, I'm using multiple LFOs on the same cutoff, all playing at different rates. This creates a much more interesting and dynamic motion rather than a simple open and closing wave. In this patch, I used the Harmonics section to create a number of bell tone-like waveforms, then using Serum's morph modes to blend between them seamlessly. This creates a smooth, glossy drone with a unique tone. Finally, some of my favourite patches to create are ones that use no main oscillators at all. Instead, importing a sample into the noise oscillator and using a tune and key tracked filter with an extremely high resonance to create the tone. Applying distortion to this can lead to interesting results. I hope you can see that mastering harmonics can significantly improve your sound design game, and by understanding and manipulating them using these basic concepts, you'll be able to create much more complex and interesting sounds. If you like the sound of any of the drone patches featured in this video, then you can check out our new Fred Again inspired drone pack in the description below. It features 100 samples and 50 Serum presets to help give your track some depth and ambience. I hope you're able to get some good ideas and inspiration from this video. I'm keen to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until the next one, cheers.